Phase 2 started on the 1st of March. It provided a new system, a new process, and some pretty poorly drafted information from Immigration New Zealand. And it's led to us receiving a lot of requests to do a video covering Phase 2, how it works, and some of the questions that many of you have. So that's what today's video is going to be covering. That's all related, of course, to the 2021 one-off residence visa. It is 5:15 here on Monday, 21 March 2022. My name is Arran Hunt. I am a partner at the law firm Stace Hammond, where I head up the immigration team. And as always, this is not immigration advice. This is just our commentary on immigration here in New Zealand. If you're looking for advice, please get in contact with us directly via our website or at the email in the description down below. Now, we're going to be covering a lot of information today, so we're going to try and break it down into sections, which we'll link to in the description down below, so you can just jump to the one that you want to watch. We're going to start with looking at the differences between the phases that have taken place with this visa. We'll look at the new system that's in place for Phase 2. We'll have a look at how Phase 2s are going to be sorted and allocated. We'll have a look at the automation of the process that will impact applications. We'll answer once again the question about what takes place after you make the application, as INZ have caused some confusion there. And we're going to say a few words about the national security checks. First though, phases, and you'll be aware of the basic, of course, those that had a skilled migrant category application or resident work application in process when this visa was announced could apply on the 1st of December. Also included with those who had expressions of interest in place with adult children. However, we then saw the complete collapse of the Immigration New Zealand system on the 1st of December when the system just couldn't handle the load. And INZ were, of course, concerned with how things were going to be with Phase 2 on the 1st of March, when we're going to have about roughly 8 times the applications that we had in the Phase 1. To help out with this load, INZ did a number of different things. Now, the first thing they did was they created a new phase, a Phase 1.5, and I love how the internet and Facebook create these terms. Like Phase 1.5, that was created online, the name was. Be open to those who had an expression of interest submitted prior to Phase 1.5 being announced, and they divide those over about a 10-day period. So those who had applied prior to a certain date were in that first day, I think it was like, essentially it was a week, February 22nd, then over the next few months, February 23rd, 24th, and sort of going through until March the 1st being the final day that people could apply under that Phase 1.5. They also did a change into how they're going to process Phase 2. We'll come to that in a moment. Now, Phase 1.5 would use the old immigration system that you will all be familiar with and which had been used in Phase 1. It's identical actually to Phase 1 process, being the application will be allocated to an officer almost straight away, and payment would be made once the application had been approved in principle. Now, some applications were processed very quickly, with one of our clients being approved in principle within just 3 days of the application being submitted. But on that point, I want to just mention that that was an exception. It was a very fast exception where everything was done right, and all the things lined up perfectly. Applications generally might take several months, and if they do not panic and do not compare your application to somebody else that you know or somebody you see online, as every application is different and has different factors. For that applicant, everything was perfect, lined up, perfect timing, it just worked. Other applicants are going to have other scenarios, other factors in play, which could take longer. These are still taking a shorter period than any other residence application we've ever seen. So RV21s, even taking several months, are still much faster than anything else. So please do not panic and do not compare your own application to that of others, because that's just going to have you either happy if it's really fast or concerned it's taking more time. Now, if you don't hear from the officer for a few weeks, do not panic. That happens. Let them do their job. They are extremely busy with tens of thousands of applications going through with this thing. You have an officer probably handling 100 applications at a time. So just let them do their thing. Now, back to the information here. Now, there is, of course, a new system from phase 2 for the 1st of March. This is called the Enhanced Immigration System. It is interesting. That's a word for it, interesting. It has positives and negatives. Positives, we got some here. It is definitely faster than the old system, which was developed some years ago and was problematic. You'd often see this where it would say to you, hold on a sec, give it a few seconds and click again for it to go through. It was slow at times. The new one's much faster. Also handles photos better, we think. The old system had some issues with photos of people that weren't European. So people from other areas of the world, well, most of the world aren't European. It had issues, and I would often spend a lot of time tweaking with the brightness and contrast and trying to get a photo to be allowed into the system where it was causing issues. But we're not quite sure whether that's actually going to be an issue. We'll come to that later. Now, some negatives. It is really badly worded in parts, particularly around partners and dependents. In some questions, it is clear it is asking about the partner or the dependent. On the next page, it seems to be asking the main applicant. We expect that it's going to create a lot of issues for applicants who answered the question for the wrong person because they followed the actual wording on the page. Another example of this is where the review of the partner or the child at the end, when you fill out the application, it will give you a one-page review of all the answers. In that page, it actually mentions the eligible visa for the main applicant when you're looking at the partner or the dependent child. And I know for my clients who looked at it, they've said to me, well, Aaron, that's not what the visa the person holds. And so, well, that actually doesn't matter. That's what the system sees it as. They record the visa of the main applicant for the dependent children and the partner. It's a confusing situation. The travel history section is also terribly written. It seems to be an assumption that people only ever travel for certain reasons, with no option to travel to live somewhere. So as an example, it asks if you have ever traveled internationally, which should be a yes, because the most likely for someone applying for immigration, they will have been born overseas, so they have at some point been overseas. But when you select yes, it then demands you to tell them when you travelled in the past 5 years, and saying that you haven't isn't an option. It seems to be that if you travel internationally, it must be in the last 5 years. So those are my clients who haven't been anywhere in the last 5 years. And to be honest, the last 2 and a bit years, no one travelled anywhere anyway. They aren't given the option to say, yes, they've been internationally, but not in the past 5 years. It seems to be this strange set of questions. And we've had some clarification from immigration since then that if you've left New Zealand in the past 5 years, you don't have to say that you've left or entered New Zealand. But that doesn't seem to make sense, because if you've left the country and you exclude that, then what are they actually asking for? It's just a really badly worded section. There's also no option to travel without a return date. So you can't say that you've come to New Zealand as being travel, because, well, the same to exclude that now, but that seems to be what they're actually asking for. Now, if you haven't seen this section, that is because you weren't part of the national security check process, which you've been lucky to avoid. We will cover more of that later in this video. Similarly, poorly worded things like asking for the marital status of a deceased parent, which I had to actually give some thought to when I was filling out some applications to clients, whether we say a deceased person is still married or not. This is under review. Immigration has told us this, and hopefully it will be fixed. Again, that only covers those who are part of the NSC check, because if you're not part of the national security check requirement, then it's going to ask you about your deceased parents, only the ones who are still living. There's also some wording where the question it asks does not follow the operational manual. Now, one example is in relation to people who need full-time care in the community. Now, this falls under A460 on the operational manual, and it's one of the few scenarios where a medical waiver won't be given by default. The question asked in the application does not follow the requirement as listed in the operational manual. It seems to be providing different criteria, which as a lawyer really bothers me, because they're being asked one question here when actually the question they're actually supposed to be applying isn't being asked. They're asking something else. So that appears a few times within the actual application form, where they haven't actually looked at the wording and gone, well, is that actually the rules? Is that what they're supposed to be applying? Or are they trying to apply a different interpretation. That's the issue, is that if you try to rewrite something in a different way, it can so easily be come across in a different way or be applied differently. And that's why they should be using the exact same wording as the operational manual. They aren't in that situation or in several others. There's also an issue people have been having with submitting applications without including their partner or children, because it's a new system. And in the old system, you would complete the form, and as part of that, it would ask about your family. You tick a box saying, yes, I'm including my family, and then ask you about it. Now, this one here, it doesn't ask you about that. You have to actually add them as a separate process. And people have actually missed that. If you have, you are not alone. And Immigration said that they will, at the end of March, come to you and say, is everything okay? Anything that needs to be fixed, and they will let you fix that at that point. Same with anything you may have missed from the application, they can let you fix that at the end of March. It is a new system that has teething issues. As I said, it has a few negatives in there. So they're giving you the chance to fix that at that point. Now, looking back again as to the other ways they're going to keep the load off the server is the change in how they're going to do the allocations for the applications from March in phase 2. One we're actually not quite sure whether it's legal, but we'll come to that in a moment. Instead of applications being allocated in the order they were placed, which would encourage people to get on there on the 1st of March and get the applications done as soon as possible, what they're doing is they're going to pull the applications together with none being worked on, and then at the end of March, they will sort them by the expiry date of the visa held when the application was submitted. Now, to clarify that, the word provided by Immigration New Zealand was pretty much that the expiry date as at the date of the application being submitted is what is important. This is actually why they ask you to enter the date into the application, which is something that we've never seen before, because they know the dates anyway. But they're asking you that then because at the end of the month, they can just go, yep, sort by date, and that is the order. So if you get another visa between applying the application and the end of the month, that shouldn't matter. It's done by, or it should be done by the date that you had at the expiry when you made the application. So if you are getting another visa or visas you've applied for, get the application in perhaps before you get that visa, because that's going to sort of show and change where you are going to fall in that allocation process. Now, as to the legality, now the processing order of applications is handled under A16.1 of the operational manual, and this states that priority will be given in the lodgement date order, so the order that you lodge the applications in. Now, they can give extra allowances for how applications get sorted or priorities, but it has to be listed in the A16.1 section as the priorities. It doesn't mention this month allowance and sorting by date allowance within that A16.1 section. So it should actually still be done on the date that you make the application. That's the date that it gets lodged, and so it goes into that order. So they've either ignoring that, or they're taking a rather different interpretation as to how that A16.1 is going to work. But the honest truth, I think, is that nobody's going to complain, because that's going to cost them lots of money and hassle, and it's just they want to get their applications done. So I think it's just the lawyer side of me saying that this isn't quite how it's stated it's going to work, but that's how they're going to work with it. So at the end of the month, they're going to order these visas by the expiry date as at the date of the application of your visa, with those expiring sooner being allocated first, and those with later visas that expire later on coming later in the queue. Now, this is likely to upset those of you who have visas due to expire sort of 2024, 2025. But the reality is the speed that INZ is doing these applications at, it probably won't make that much of a difference, probably a several months difference, but not the sort of years of waiting we saw with skilled migrant. They've been doing what they can to smooth this process, to make it simpler, to make it faster. They've been removing the need for offshore police certificates, the need to prove partnerships. That's been removed if you've held a partner visa. So they're doing these things to make things faster. So we don't think that's actually going to make much of a difference whether you get allocated sort of at the front of the queue or nearer to the end. It should still be a relatively quick and easy process. What they're also doing to make it faster is they're bringing in automation to help with the processing. Now, this is something that's actually perfect for RV21 because much of it can be done automatically, especially for settled criteria and some of those applying under scarce criteria. For example, Immigration New Zealand hold a lot of information on someone. They'll already have a scan of your passport, but have access to your travel history and your visa history. From that alone, they can probably work out whether you're eligible for a settled criteria visa. And for scarce category, if you have an essential skills work visa for a job that is in the scarce category list, they can probably easily go, well, yes, they hold a visa for being a nurse. That's in the list. There we go, scarce criteria met. They may require some things like, proof that you're still working, but it should be a relatively smooth and simple process, which they can do at a sort of record pace. Now, they've given us some information about the process itself, and it will be in 4 steps. So the first step is that the system will create a PDF of the application and upload it to the online account. Now, this will trigger an email to you or your advisor or lawyer, letting you know that it's available. And this will take place, we think, on 1 April or soon after that start of April. This will then trigger a request for you to upload any documentation that they may need, depending on what was in the application. So if you're going for the scarce criteria, they may need evidence that you are working in that role, especially if you're on a post-study work visa. If you're going for skilled, they may require pay slips or bank statements to show that you were getting paid that amount as at those eligible dates. Now, it isn't until after you provide this documentation that it will actually go to the National Documentation Office, or NADO as we call it, and they will check that the documentation that they need to process is all on the file. And we would expect that some will require very little for them to do. It should basically just come through and go through. At this point here, they will also check the photo quality, and this is what I'm sort of dubious as to how they're going to check it. If they're going to use the same system they use currently, then it's going to be an issue because it's not good with some non-European faces. Now, once that has all gone through, it will move on to step 2, and this will involve resolving identities using ID.me. Now, ID.me is a relatively new part. We're going to learn more about that. We'll do a video about that in the future when we hear more about how that's going to work. An application will then be made in the old system, but this is only there to sort of hold system data. So I think sort of correspondence with the call center will go into that file rather than the new system, or the data on the application itself will be housed in the new system rather than the old system. The passport will also be at that point be validated at that point. Step 3 will then happen at the same time. All these things will take place. They'll ask for a New Zealand police certificate if required. They'll do a national security check if required, and a health assessment will be required if required. So that means the NSC will be asked for a little bit into the process, which will be a little bit of a delay for those of you doing the NSC, but we'll still be at step 3 relatively quick, especially if you get the documentation they need to them as fast as you can. And then we go from there to step 4, and that's when the officer will actually look at it if required, and will issue a PPI, or it could just go through to being decided and quality checked before it gets issued. So it is a relatively simple process. They have streamlined it as much as possible, and they should get through it relatively quickly. Now, the question we get asked the most, and we see this posted almost daily, and we get asked about it frequently through messages and emails, is what can somebody do after they've made the application, mostly around changing job or traveling. Now, we've covered this in the video before, but we understand a reason why this is being asked again, because, well, we'll show you in a moment as to why this confusion is still there. Now, the requirement to be eligible occurs on 2 occasions. First is on that 29th of September 2021, and then it's again on the day that you apply. Now, after you submit the application, that need to be eligible comes to an end. You need to remain lawful in New Zealand. If you are in the country, remain lawful, hold a visa, and maintain the requirements of the visa. So if you have a visa for a certain job, then keep working in that job. Now, if you're going to, you can go and change your job if you do it the correct way with, if required a variation, that sort of thing. You can change your visa. You can go to a student visa, a visitor visa, go to a partnership visa, as long as you do it lawfully and you follow the rules, and you can go offshore. Now, the one caution we do have is that if your job is fairly new and you leave straight after apply, INZ could question if the job was genuine in the first place. So be cautious there. If you're not sure, definitely get legal advice on that. So this allowance to change your situation after you've made the application, that has been confirmed by Immigration New Zealand a number of times. We've heard it from senior staff. We've heard it from a number of their staff, actually. It's in their knowledge base under 25066. Give them a call and ask for knowledge base 25066. It's something that's been really well established in regards to going offshore. They covered it in a release they put out on 2 December 2021. I've linked that before in previous videos, which is on their Immigration New Zealand website. That states that you can go offshore and they'll grant the visa if you are offshore. Now, INZ haven't helped this, and we can understand the confusion that they have been causing. We've heard from people who have been told by the call centre that they leave New Zealand, they won't be able to re-enter on their current visa, despite it still being valid. There was also an email sent out by immigration to those of you who had applied for RV21 that stated that you need to tell them about a change of circumstance if one took place that may affect your eligibility, including if you leave New Zealand. Now, we've spoken to Immigration New Zealand actually about this email, and they are now getting this email changed after we raised it with them, because leaving New Zealand does not affect your eligibility. Your eligibility requirements are when you apply. If you leave the country after you're applying, that does not impact whether you are eligible on the day that you applied for your visa. So they're looking at correcting the wording on that email, and hopefully that fixes some issues. I'd love to see them actually do a release on this, but I doubt they're going to. So hopefully this video just gives some of you some confidence that this is what we have heard from immigration managers themselves. We don't know why they said that in the email. Perhaps it was just someone using a previous email from another application where perhaps going offshore was going to impact it, or they weren't aware of how this is going to work. But definitely in this circumstance, in this situation, leaving New Zealand is not something that's going to affect your eligibility. Actually, very few things will affect your eligibility, because your eligibility is judged at the point you apply, not about what happens afterwards, as long as you remain lawful and you don't go breaking the law, character issues, that sort of thing. And finally, we wanted to do a couple of quick notes about the national security checks. Now, I say quick because honestly, we don't know much. This is something that's handled by the NZSIS, which is one of the government security bureaus and departments, and they won't tell us much about actually what they're doing, who they're asking of this. I've talked to media about this, and the media have asked the questions as well, and they've had the same response of, it's top secret, it's confidential, we cannot tell you these things. There are some people, often based on where they're from or what countries they're citizens of, who are asked to go through this NSC process. And in phase 2, you can tell if you're going through the process if they're asking about your work or education history. And if they're not asking you, then no NSC, it seems. They're asking you, then you're doing an NSC check. Same with asking about any deceased parents. So that's also an NSC thing. So when you see those people online who are talking about how fast the application took, they may not have had the NSC requirements that you had of filling out your education history or all of your work history going back so many decades. We see it places like China have NSC, some Soviet countries have it. We also see Sri Lanka now having NSC, where previously we didn't have NSC requirements several years ago. And we believe this is due to the supermarket knife attacker being from Sri Lanka. And that's sort of, I think, given the NZSIS some concern about possible other people from Sri Lanka. So now Sri Lankans have to do this form. It is a hassle, definitely it's a hassle, but it is out of immigration's hands, actually. The NSCs are going through faster now than ever before. We've seen them. They can still range from several weeks up to being several months. We have a client from 1 December who is still waiting for their NSC to come through, which is a frustrating long delay. But it is actually faster than we have seen it in the past, when they have taken more than 6 months at times. The actual process that NZSIS go through isn't detailed. They won't tell us. It may involve a third party outside New Zealand, like Interpol or someone similar. although it could just be NZSIS looking at the file and going, yep, that person's fine, and letting it go through. So as we have the variance between a few weeks to months, because it can depend on what process they want to take through. It's just hard to say. However, what we can say is that Immigration New Zealand, because it's outside of their control, they cannot hurry things up. They will give the NZSIS 6 months before they ask, hey, where's this at? It's been 6 months now. So please don't get angry with Immigration New Zealand. It's outside of their hands. This is a government decision, a government choice, and another department handling this. It is not an INZ thing, so please don't get angry at them. And that's it for today's video. We do want to do a video coming up at some point covering some of the new border exceptions that are in place if we have time. It is this sort of very busy period. If this video has helped you in any way, please consider leaving us a Google review. There's a link in the description down below to get to the Google review page. And of course, like and share the video and subscribe for future videos and tick that bell icon. I will, where possible, try to answer your questions on the video. It varies from day to day whether I have time to do that or not. But if I can, I will get on there and do it. I try and help out where possible. Until the next video, kia kaha and stay safe.